The objectivist virtues apply first and foremost to you as an individual. Today, we turn to the problem of sorting good people from bad people. This is the task of the virtue of justice, which is our topic. As we'll see, objectivism has a distinctive take on the principle of justice, one that derives most importantly from its view of evil. In addition to justice, I plan to talk about the virtue of benevolence that David Kelly described in his essay on rugged individualism. And in the outline in your binder, this discussion is placed early in the talk, but in fact, I've decided that benevolence will fit in better toward the end, so please note this change of the outline. We'll be keeping an extended focus on justice and then turn to benevolence to see how both virtues fit together. Now, what is justice? Most people associate justice first and foremost with the law. Justice is a central goal of courtrooms. The Attorney General of the United States heads up a department of what? Justice, charged with enforcing federal law. When the police arrest a subject, we call it bringing him to justice. Exactly. Legal justice involves a determination whether or not a person has committed a crime. The law lays out definitions of crimes and the penalties for committing them. Justice is served by a judge with an objective temperament, one who is not supposed to be biased, one who applies the law without fear or favor. In the American jury system, guilt is often determined by a jury of normal citizens, sometimes they're not so normal, who are, so guilt is determined by a jury of normal citizens who are charged with weighing the evidence fairly and objectively. To ensure justice, criminal cases in this country are undertaken by an oppositional system of argument. The prosecution marshals the best argument for guilt that it can, and it is rewarded for successful prosecutions, while defense attorneys marshal the best argument for the defense that they can find. And they too are rewarded, at least in their reputations and future business, if they manage to win the exoneration of their clients. The oppositional system is another way in which objectivity enters into legal justice. But in this case, the opposition of two sides seeks to head off any biased argument at the pass by attempting to give the two sides unequivocally biased interests in, on the one hand, a guilty verdict, and on the other hand, in finding of innocence. Objectivity enters into the American legal justice system in another key respect. And this is the doctrine of presumed innocent until proven guilty. The presumption of innocence follows from a basic principle of logic, that the burden of proof lies with whoever wants to add a claim to our existing store of knowledge. If you're going to make a claim, if you're going to say something is true, it's up to you to tell why. Why is it true? The person who denies it doesn't have to do anything. Since each person is innocent of any crime at birth, at least, the status quo before any criminal legal procedure must be innocence. It is the facts brought out at the trial that are supposed to establish the guilt of the defendant. It is thus simply good logic that the defense is not charged with proving anything, and that the prosecution has the responsibility of establishing guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, there's more to say about legal justice. I mean, for one thing, there's civil justice as well as criminal justice, and one can bring a lawsuit for compensation for harms one is offered, and that too might be called seeking justice. But notice, this hints at the fact that while we most often hear of justice in the context of the legal system, justice is not something the law is, but rather something the law is thought to contain or apply. In the famous O.J. Simpson trial, Simpson, who was accused of murder, was found not guilty by a jury. The prosecution failed to convince at least the jury that Simpson was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The families of the victims of the crime, however, convinced on their part that Simpson was guilty, then brought a lawsuit in civil court for wrongful death. And the families exploited the looser standards of evidence in civil cases, as well as the fact that the civil trial was held in a different location from the criminal trial, to win a judgment of millions of dollars against Simpson for apparently having caused the deaths for which he had been found innocent. The point here is not about civil versus criminal trials. The point is that the families felt that the criminal case had worked out unjustly. Their complaints were many. They thought that the judge had been indolent. They thought that the judge had been indulgent of defense trickery, or that the jury was bamboozled by defense lawyer Johnny Cochran's specious oratory. So the point is, a deeper standard of justice is what informs the ideas and standards of justice we see in the law. And when justice is applied, it's applied with continuous and multiple level checks and balances and attempts at reaching objectivity. Objectivity in justice. These are both moral concepts. So the deeper standard here is moral justice. Moral justice seeks to establish the moral status of human actions. In the law, the criminal code defines a list of acts that have been established as very wrong through the social processes that create the law, such as when legislation is passed by democratically elected representative legislators. The civil law has a different list of wrong acts for which victims may seek redress. And in some cases, the wrong consists in violating someone's rights. But the issue of rights really doesn't matter much for what I want to talk about here. The point is that the standards of law exist as an instance of methods of determining the moral status of other people. Objectivity is vital to the law because many people seem to have the view that whether or not a person has done something wrong is a fact that can be established by objective inquiry. When a large swath of the public rejects the result of a trial, this is usually because they dispute the facts of the matter and challenge the objectivity of the investigation. But on the other hand, those who are unhappy with a trial's result are often unhappy not because they disagree about the facts of the matter, because the trials ensure objectivity, but rather because they disagree about the propriety of the law in question. So underlying legal justice in our culture is a moral standard that involves these two elements: objectivity, which is fitting claims to the facts, and the second element is the moral standard. It's the idea that relations between people ought to be just, that people ought to get what they deserve, that there should be fairness in our dealings with others. Now, in philosophy, there's a fair amount of confusion as to what moral justice would consist of. I mean, some philosophers think there are no objective standards of goodness or fairness, that it's all up to individuals to sort out however they like. Others hold that justice amounts to a social standard of equality or egalitarianism, so that there's a kind of social justice that applies to issues of wealth and poverty and of social class. And then there are more types of philosophical theories of moral justice, but getting into all of them really need not detain us at the moment. Because if you know the objectivist approach to ethics, in fact, if you know the objectivist approach to most any question in philosophy, you know that while objectivism often takes up an idea with a tradition in philosophic thought, it makes the idea its own through a rigorous re-examination of the idea's basis in fact. What facts of reality give rise to this concept? This was Ayn Rand's question for philosophic ideas. What facts make it meaningful? Why do we need it? In her conception of justice, Rand applied this question to the fact that we try to judge the rightness or wrongness of the actions of others by a moral standard. Why do we need such a policy? And what standards would be appropriate? What should the goal of justice be? What follows from applying justice in our lives? Most of this lecture will be devoted to answering these questions. We'll be turning first to the basic need for and the meaning of the virtue of justice. Then, since the objectivist view of justice requires a commitment to morally evaluate others, I want to discuss the process by which one determines the moral status of actions and character of others. And finally, we'll turn to benevolence and the relation between justice and benevolence at the end. So, on to the virtue of justice and why we need it. Now, in a general sense, the virtue of justice is a policy of evaluating others or valuing others rationally. As a policy, justice requires judging others in accordance with the appropriate principles and standards. It requires taking account of all the relevant facts, and only those facts. That's the aspect of objectivity. And acting accordingly, treating people as they actually deserve. Here's how Ayn Rand described the content of this virtue of justice in Atlas Shrugged. She said, "Justice is the recognition of the fact that you cannot fake the character of men as you cannot fake the character of nature. That you must judge all men as conscientiously as you judge inanimate objects, with the same respect for truth, with the same incorruptible vision, as by pure and rational a process of identification. That every man must be judged for what he is and treated accordingly. That your moral appraisal is the coin paying men for their virtues or vices, and this payment demands of you as scrupulous an honor as you bring to financial transactions. That to hold your contempt from men's vices is an act of moral counterfeiting, and to withhold your admiration from their virtues is an act of moral embezzlement. That to place any other concern higher than justice is to devaluate your moral currency and defraud the good in favor of the evil, since only the good can lose by default of justice, and only the evil can profit." Now, the key points in the view of justice that Rand lays out here are that people have an objective moral status. Their good or moral shortcomings are a fact of the matter. Since moral status is a fact, you should judge it like you judge any fact, by the standards and methods of rationality. The moral status of others matters to us, and it is, other things equal, worth knowing. It's not an end in itself. Nothing in objectivism is an end in itself except your own life, and even then you choose that. But it's something that it's good to know. The moral status of others, other things equal, is worth knowing. And we should act to encourage the good and discourage the evil for our own selfish benefit. We'll be coming back to all these points shortly. But first, we need to step back for a second and consider the reason why it is possible to morally evaluate other people. I mean, you can't morally evaluate a fish, can you? You can't morally evaluate a rock, can you? So why can you morally evaluate a human being? Well, the fundamental fact that makes justice necessary is the distinction between the metaphysical and the man-made. Rand described this distinction in this way. She said, "It's the metaphysically given that must be accepted. It cannot be changed. It's the man-made that must never be accepted uncritically. It must be judged, then accepted or rejected, and changed where necessary. Man is not omniscient or infallible. He can make innocent errors through lack of knowledge, or he can lie, cheat, and fake. The man-made may be a product of genius, perceptiveness, ingenuity, or it may be a product of stupidity, deception, malice, evil." Here are some examples of the metaphysical: the laws of physics, the laws of chemistry, the laws of biology. And by contrast, the man-made includes the laws of America, the laws of the Virginias, the laws of Alexandria. Both the metaphysical and the man-made may be evaluated in relation to one's own life needs. You may say, "This mountain is good for me because its snow is fun to ski on." Or, "This mountain is bad for me because it is a volcano that periodically erupts," as a volcano erupted on me a few months ago, "and it buries the town in ash and cinders." Well, not just me personally. Now, consider the human case. You can say of Jane, for example, Jane Doe, that Jane is good because she's hardworking, a talented painter, and she's creating value for herself and others. She's good in relation to your needs because she's a positive contributor to society, including you, and she creates paintings that you value. So she's good for you. Or we could say that Jane was bad by the standard of our own needs if she were a bank robber In this case, she would be a threat to our money and security, particularly if she was robbing our bank. So anything can be evaluated as to how well it satisfies one's life needs. And if this were all we had to say, Rand's distinction wouldn't make much difference. But Rand's point is that human actions don't have to follow a fixed course. The metaphysical is given in nature, but human actions and creations exist by choice. And we can evaluate that choice by its moral status. Now, in Objectivism, morality is a code of universal principles to guide one's actions in support of one's life. Moral principles apply to all human beings, but the ultimate goal in ethics for each one of us is our own life and happiness. We can judge others by the universal standard of the life of a rational being, but we must remain aware that the value significance of a person's acts may be different for different people. For example, if due to her abuse of drugs and evasion of long-term life needs, Cindy finds herself stumbling into traffic in a stupor and she gets run over, we might conclude that Cindy had acted irrationally. She had not lived a fully moral life. But notice, though, that to Cindy, the price of that moral failing was death. Meanwhile, for Jane in Peoria, it was just the loss of an unknown stranger of no particularly great importance. A tragedy, to be sure, but of less concern to Jane than many other affairs back in Peoria, including in particular her husband's affairs with other women. So, moral evaluation is possible because we choose the actions to take and because we have free will. A human act isn't required to happen, so patterns of human action can be assessed, and good patterns can be encouraged, and bad ones discouraged. And this is why we need justice. We need justice in order to choose relationships that are beneficial and to conduct them in ways that enhance our lives. We need to judge whether other people will do us good or serve us a bad turn. That's by the standard of how much you as an individual might benefit or stand to lose from the other person's actions. We need to distinguish people who are morally good versus those that are evil. Morally good people, by objectivist standards, are those who live by reason and production. They deal with others by trade. Their success is good for everyone else, or at the least, it isn't harmful. A morally good person is a promising potential trading partner. But justice is also our means of protecting ourselves from evil, while we try to benefit from moral goodness. In the objectivist view, evil is basically irrational. It's evil to want to murder people, but it's irrational too, because our lives and happiness are not served by killing, except in self-defense, and that's not murder. The basic vice in objectivism is the choice to evade thought. Unreason is the root of all evil, because to the extent that we abandon reason, we abandon our ability to see beyond the present moment, and we abandon our ability to deal with others by objective discussion and trade. And we abandon our ability to produce values, and we abandon our ability to guide our actions by moral principles that identify the life that can flourish, and that can do so in harmony with others. Because it's irrational, evil doesn't aim for its goals with consistency and clarity. To the extent that a person is consistent, he's practicing the virtue of purposefulness or productiveness, or exhibiting integrity. Because it's irrational, evil does not act for its own real long-term interests. Instead, it careers off in directions that sooner or later aim at death. Because it's irrational, evil does not invent brilliant technologies or diabolical master plans. To the extent that a person can do that, it's the rational aspects of his character at work. Thus, evil, on its own principles, is irrational, incoherent, self-destructive, and uncreative. It's chaotic, not constructive. This is why evil in itself is impotent. Evil itself does not threaten the peace of the world. No, that happens when evil is supported by brilliant scientists and engineers, when evil is supported by millions of hardworking, reasonable people, when evil has the most brilliant generals implementing its plans. Consider the Congo, that country formerly renamed Zaire, is a place where all manner of unreason is at work. The Congo is heavily affected by all that is the root of evil and all the ills attendant on it: corruption and warfare, ignorance and low technology. Its infrastructure has crumbled. Its commerce has disappeared. While many Congolese are innocent, decent victims, the character of the country and its culture may with justice be called evil. This is a human tragedy. It's a loss of value to all of us. But Congo, so lost to reason in so many ways, is not a threat to peace in the world. Congo does not threaten modern civilization because it is impotent to do much of anything to modern civilization. Now, consider by contrast the case of Arabia. There too, unreason is at work. The culture is infected with a virulent ideology that proclaims its love of death. And I'm not kidding. This is what Muslim fundamentalist radicals actually say, and eagerly. It hates the values of the Enlightenment and the secular, tolerant, commercial society of the West. Now, if that was all there was to it, then we would have nothing to worry about. But alas, Arabia is full of virtuous people. It's full of wealth and productive activity. It's able to send its young men to the best universities and train them in the most modern technologies. And indeed, thanks to their ideology, those that go tend to be almost all young men. It enjoys the benefit of the hardworking immigrants from all over the world who go to Arabia to benefit from its natural riches. Now, evil has become a threat. A fanatic with a sword can spit his rage all he wants, and civilization shrugs. But an anti-life fanatic with a mastery of electronic communication, a fanatic with a mastery of ballistics and physics, a fanatic funded by the productive wealth of industrial civilization, now that is the evil that is dangerous. That is the evil that is efficacious. That's the evil you've got to worry about. And not so much because it is evil, but because of the extent to which its evil is upheld, endorsed, supplied, and engineered by the good and the rational. Evil is impotent if left to its own devices. It's like a fire. Once the fuel's burned up, it just can't go on. It's life that goes on and on. It's the good that gives evil its motive power in the world. The policy of action that follows from this recognition is deny evil any existential aid and deny to evil any moral support. Let it burn itself out. Let it exert the force of its own irrational incoherence. The first element of this policy, of following this policy of action towards evil, is denying existential aid to unreason. Existential support is support in achieving its ends. It's support in the form of money or one's time or other resources. It's support in the form of useful knowledge or techniques. It includes technology and machinery. It includes organizational methods and military tactics. Often, denying existential aid to evil is easy. To deny support of the Ku Klux Klan, all you have to do is have nothing to do with the Klan or its members. But the devil is in the details, because some existential aid is almost always unavoidable. Can every store deny their custom to Klansmen? And even if they all wanted to, it would be hard to tell the ideological affiliation of every person who came through the door. And it gets more complicated. Does anybody here buy Domino's Pizza? I have. But when you buy Domino's Pizza, you surely are not intending to support Catholic charities. But you do, because Tom Monahan, the founder of Domino's, is a big supporter of Catholic causes. He also provides the town of Ypsilanti, Michigan, with a first-rate light show at Christmas time, which just goes to show how mixed one's indirect sanction can be. If only you could buy that pizza with a rider. I support the Christmas show, not the new university you founded. So the primary motive for your actions must always be to seek your own values. In this context, though, work to minimize your support of evil and to magnify your support of the good. So don't directly support irrational causes with donations. Consider supporting causes that support your values with your donations. Consider how much of a value a product represents to you when it's explicitly linked with dubious causes. Ben & Jerry's ice cream is an example, since it promises to support leftist activism. Now, some objectivists have argued that it's immoral to trade with countries that are ruled by totalitarian regimes. It's an instance of denying existential aid to evil because the totalitarian regimes are evil, so by not trading with them, you deny them the taxes and money that they support that they need to keep working. The logic of this argument is that trade strengthens the evil regime financially and technologically. The prime example of this is the old Soviet Union, which got much of its technology through deals with Western firms. For example, the last affordable Soviet-era car was really a Fiat, built with Italian technology, even a whole Italian factory. Now today, people extend this principle to the neo-socialist regime in Venezuela, for example, or to the issue of trade with Maoist China. In my view, there's a big difference between trading with private individuals that suffer under a dictatorship and trading directly with the dictatorship government. Trading with individuals can help encourage capitalist and individual forces, capitalist and individualist forces. Trading with the governments is more likely to keep them in power. I would also add that if such a policy is to be pursued, it should be consistent. If China is objectionable, despite its many capitalist elements, despite the advance in reason that's occurring there, but if China is objectionable because of its form of government, then surely Saudi Arabia should be too. Ultimately, your values have to decide. But never forget that you're not served when the enemies of your values are funded and materially enabled. You should be at least as cautious with your cash as with your praise. Now, the other aspect of the rational policy towards evil is to deny the irrational one's moral sanction. Sanction is praising or endorsing actions, ideas, or individuals. Sanction means providing moral support. Now, the basic policy here is sanction the good and deny sanction to the evil. One can sanction individual acts with praise or blame. One can sanction aspects of another person's character by indulging patterns of vice or encouraging patterns of virtue. The point is, deny your moral approval to whatever degree of irrationality you encounter, and give your approval to whatever degree of rationality you find too. Now, this doctrine of moral sanction has caused some controversy among objectivists regarding how to apply the principles of moral judgment. You can read about one such case and a full discussion of the principles I'm presenting here in David Kelly's book, The Contested Legacy of Ayn Rand, Truth and Toleration in Objectivism. Now, one has to be careful in practicing moral judgment in order to avoid moralism, which is an obsession with moral judgment at the expense of other worthy activities. And one also needs to avoid moral hysteria, which is an emotionalistic exaggeration of moral evaluations and the consequent loss of the vital sense of proportion in moral judgment. It's worth noting that both moralism and moral hysteria are violations of the prime virtue of rationality. So, in view of all this, it's worth looking at the practice of moral judgment in more depth. Now, a moral judgment is the evaluation of the actions and moral character of others. It requires objectivity, judging people by the standards, judging people by the principles of ethics and evaluation in accordance with one's own purposes, taking into account all the relevant facts and only those facts, treating people as they deserve by giving praise or blame, sanction or rejection. You all know the conventional bromide, I suppose, that one should temper justice with mercy. You know, mercy is meant to accept human failings. By mercy, that is, people mean that one accepts human failings and extends pity to the unfortunate. I don't know how a judgment could be both just and yet in need of correction. Now, objectivity is essential to justice. If justice merits its name, it is just. It assesses a person's deserts and treats him accordingly. If we're just, we base our judgments solely on the facts. We take care to take in all the context. We need to recognize the positive as well as the negative as well as the positive. We need to respond appropriately and not sensationalize the situation. If our judgments are objective, they don't require mercy. In this context, mercy is an anti-concept, a kind of vague tag for non-justice, for double standards. Mercy is a virtue only if one's judgments follow from hatred or anger. And it's true that emotionalism such as rage is a vice, and that it's inimical to true justice. But it's your commitment to objectivity that consists in avoiding emotionalism. It's your commitment to objectivity that must give you the temperament of a judge, granting neither fear nor favor, in which case you don't need a principle of mercy. Now, as I said, moral judgment, when you're engaging in a moral judgment, you're evaluating the acts and moral character of other people objectively. We tend to think that we need to evaluate people without considering the different levels or stages at which we might evaluate the actions and character of other people. But in fact, there's a vast difference between knowing that somebody did something wrong, like your friend let you down and didn't show up for the camping weekend that you'd planned. There's a big difference between that and interpreting the motives, understanding why your friend let you down and didn't show up. Was it because your friend has decided you're not worth the time and blew you off? Or was it because her father just fell gravely ill and she had to run off and it happened that her cell phone stopped working so she couldn't let you know? It would make a huge difference to what you think of that action if you understood that difference in motive. But you'd have to know your friend pretty well to know something like that. A lot of cases, someone may do something rude to you in the street. You won't understand the motive. Or someone may support an idea you think is clearly connected with evil, like back to nature environmentalism. And yet, if you don't understand why they hold that view, you're not in much of a position to evaluate the moral status of that action. Beyond motives, if we're trying to evaluate a person, we need to be able to infer what their character traits are. Because if we're going to talk about the moral status of a person, then we need to know how they are customarily in a certain aspect of life. How do they tend to act? Because people who tend to act right are ones we really need to encourage, regardless of whether in a particular case they acted right. But if they tend to act right in an important area that matters to us, that's what we ought to encourage. And if they tend to be doing the wrong thing and using an irrational method in an important area, then you have a serious issue. Finally, you could get to the point of judging the whole person, which means judging all their character traits, understanding how they are customarily in all aspects of life. But you'd have to know that person pretty darn well in order to be able to judge them. You'd have to really understand their context and why they did things. Probably to understand character traits, and certainly to understand a person, you need to observe them over time. You need a whole history of their behavior to say what you think is their actual pattern. So the practice of judging people should be careful because you don't want to engage in injustice. You don't want to jump to conclusions about people's character when you don't have sufficient information. When you do know something about their character, you've got to ask yourself, how do you respond? Are they still a basically good person who could change the bad aspects of their character? In which case, you need to wonder, what's the most constructive way to engage them? Finally, if you have to judge that a whole person is, by general character, particularly if you have to judge that they're evil, then that's a sad moment. Sometimes it happens, and it's a matter of moral hygiene that you have to sometimes stop associating with people who really are, by tendency, irrational. Well, I have some examples of engaging in moral judgment that I hope will make this a little more clear. The first is judging actions with active ally. Wait a second. I go back. Allie is a recent college graduate. Her grades in school were very modest, and she majored in English without distinction. She's come back to her home and is working at the Johnson Chemical Company, a small family-owned company, where you work too. Her job is one that involves mostly data entry, and her work has been competent, but frankly not spectacular. She tends to leave early more often than she stays late. One Friday late in the day, the chief accountant is trying to pull together numbers for the annual report to the owners. He comes over to Allie and asks her if she can stay late to put some last-minute numbers into the database for the report. He leaves her a copy of the balance sheet with the fields he needs updated circled. She sighs, but agrees. Later in the evening, she and the accountant are the only ones in the office. She pokes her head in the accountant's door. "The job's done," she says, handing him back a copy of the balance sheet he'd given her. "I'm heading out, and by the way, maybe you noticed already, but it looked to me like the totals were wrong in the totals for office equipment and raw materials. I mean, aren't those like the numbers from the third quarter report?" And she pops her gum and heads out. Now, here we're evaluating an action. We're evaluating what Allie's just done. We don't know her well enough, and we don't have enough information to infer something about her character or what her overall pattern as a person is. So first, the first step is to evaluate the action itself. Well, she finished the main task competently, and she went beyond her job description because she stayed late, and she showed initiative and rationality by thinking beyond the strict task that she was given to the overall purpose of the job and to getting the overall purpose done right. So she observed facts beyond her official competence. That's the action. Then we interpret her motives. They show attentiveness to her work and the requirements of her job, I think. It shows that her motivation was to try and get a good job done, right? But as far as inferring character traits, it's really too soon to tell. You'd have to work with her more to actually see if this is a pattern or whatever. So what's the judgment? The judgment is, this was a virtuous act. It was notable and worthy of receiving praise and credit. And if you find someone who engages in virtuous acts in ways that matter to you, and you're in a position to engage further with them, give them more opportunities to deal with broader issues. So if you were working at this firm, you maybe would want to consider giving Allie a broader range of responsibility to deal with, because you want people dealing with responsibility who take it and are motivated to do a good job. What about judging character? We're going to be judging character with Christa. Christa is your co-worker. She's a pleasant personality in the office, and you've worked with her before on a joint report. And however, she didn't get the material in on time, causing the report to be late. And you know, she didn't come through on time on another report with another coworker. And this time, you have to make a big presentation to a big client that depends on her report. So you go and talk with her. Christa, you say, I have to be able to count on your report. I'll help you in any way I can, but I can't do your report as well as my part of the presentation. I know you've let me and some others down in the past. If you can't do the report this time, please just let me know, and I'll try to get someone else assigned. Christa is such a sweetheart. She smiles at you with friendly confidence and tells you you've got nothing to worry about. The report will be there and ahead of time. Now, Christa gets a bit more cranky when she's vexed. And the day before the report is due, she's cranky. "I've been having so much trouble lately," she whines. "And the report?" you ask anxiously. "I'm working on it," she says. "I'm just a little behind." But there you are the next day, and there's no report. Christa hands you a hash of half-organized papers. "You don't know the hassles I've had to deal with lately," she offers by way of explanation. You stumble through the presentation and can't answer the client's questions, and you don't get the deal. Here we're in a situation of inferring character traits because we've seen a whole pattern of action. What are the character traits? She lets down colleagues. She makes false promises. She makes excuses rather than accepting responsibility. And she has not rectified her bad pattern of action, even when being requested to do so. So how do you judge the person? That she's not a good coworker. That there's no real benefit to working with her on projects. You're not going to come to her again and say, "Will you work with me on this presentation we've got to do?" Because it's probably not going to happen. You've got to deny moral sanction to this aspect of her character. You don't praise it. You don't say, "Hey, it was nice working with you on that report." You know? You don't give a false sense that something's really wonderful. You don't necessarily have to go, again, it's a question of tactics and how you deal with someone in that situation. Is it constructive to go and say, "That was horrible, and you were really bad about that"? Maybe, or maybe not. It really depends. Speaking that way is often more theater than it is therapy. It's more for the benefit of other people who might hear or might be modeling themselves on the behavior you see than it is for the person in question. If you're talking to the person in question, it's probably better to discuss their problem in terms of facts and possible actions that you can deal with. That depersonalizes the issue and increases the ability to try and get things done. But you certainly don't offer praise or false praise for immoral action. And you've judged her person, you don't cooperate with her existentially in this capacity. I mean, you have to say, "I'm never doing another report with Christa." That's it. You know. I mean, maybe the best course here is for Christa to change jobs. After all, she's not appalling in every aspect of her work. And this is a key lesson of objective moral judgment. People compartmentalize, and their vices in one aspect of their character may be accompanied by virtues in others. You've not concluded that Christa is a deeply evil person. You've concluded that she is an irrational and responsible worker when it comes to complex projects with deadlines. Now, I'm assuming it's possible for you to affect Christa's job assignment, or to choose not to work with her without disrupting your office. Obviously, if either of these cases does not hold, you would have to follow a more complicated path. But the goal stated in this judgment would remain. You should let your disapproval of her work be known. And even in a more complex situation, you should work on her boss to either get her or you reassigned. But politely. This isn't a vendetta. Again, it's moral hygiene. Now, the essence of moral judgment is to respond appropriately to the real traits and actions that other people exhibit. It's your way of finding out who benefits you and who doesn't. It's your way of making sure that the good and productive flourishes, while the evil and destructive is left to wither on the vine. Justice as a moral principle concerns evaluating what people deserve and responding accordingly. In this sense, justice emphasizes a rational process in dealing with others. By contrast, benevolence, which David described in his Unrugged Individualism, concerns actions we take to make the most of what society has to offer. Benevolence emphasizes policies for creating opportunities for positive relations with other people, interactions that benefit us. Benevolence describes the techniques for prospecting, as it were, in society, prospecting for allies, trade partners, friends, teachers, students, etc. Benevolence, in Kelly's conception, is a policy of treating other people as potential trading partners by recognizing their humanity and individuality and by treating them accordingly. Benevolence consists of three main elements: civility, sensitivity, and generosity. Civility is basic courtesy. It's having manners and following agreed-upon customs that make social interaction more pleasant. Its basis is a recognition that other people are human, each with a rational faculty, emotions, and their own context of values and knowledge. Their problems aren't your problems. Their concerns aren't your concerns. So when we intrude upon others, as it were, we have to ease our two contexts together. We do this with pardon and thank you, which recognize that they don't have to ease our way or help us. We're civil in debate by speaking with the presumption that our interlocutor is reasonable and that nothing personal is meant in the debate. Civility recognizes that the other person as a person and helps us all get along together. The next principle of benevolence is sensitivity. Sensitivity is, like civility, based in a basic regard for the humanity of other people. And here, humanity, this is objectivism. Humanity is not a vague term that we all feel good about. Humanity means being a rational animal who must act by the independent guidance of one's own mind. That's what humanity essentially is. Since sensitivity is a principle of paying attention to the needs and concerns of others and responding accordingly. To benefit from dealing with each other, we have to understand what each of us needs, feels, and knows. Sensitivity is attention to that issue. I mean, you don't have to be sensitive to your car. It doesn't have a volitional consciousness or feelings. You aren't counting on your car listening to you, or sharing ideas with you, or sympathizing with you, or cooperating with you. This is what you need from others, so be sensitive to them. The third aspect of benevolence, as Kelly describes it, is generosity. Generosity is a willingness to give others time, money, and/or attention without any direct expectation of a return benefit. Giving a scholarship to a student might be an example of generosity, or taking some recent acquaintances out to dinner. Generous acts, if taken in the right context, using good judgment, can set up positive longer-term relations. In this way, generosity can enhance the creation of a social value that's important to one. Taken together, these three principles form the commitment of benevolence. Together with justice, benevolence completes a fundamentally value-oriented approach to social relations. So how do these two virtues fit together? Are they in tension with each other? If you understand them correctly, you can see that benevolence is to justice as productiveness is to rationality. The virtue of rationality concerns getting knowledge in the right way. Of course, this is for acting for values, but values aren't the focus of rationality. That's the focus of productiveness, which is a policy focused on creating the values we need. Productiveness's method is rational, to be sure, but that's not the focus. So is benevolence to justice. Some objectivists, most notably the philosopher Tara Smith, have argued that benevolence, or at least most of its principles, can be assimilated to justice as a rational way of dealing with others, based in their actual traits. But the principles of benevolence aren't obvious, and they're often conflated with altruism and self-sacrifice in popular accounts. So we need to distinguish them. And they're important because of the immense and varied values that others have to offer us. So they deserve attention in the top rank of virtue principles we hold in mind. In this way, you don't merely think that you should be judging others and conferring or withholding your sanction. You also recognize you need to be civil to others and sensitive to their context, and willing to generously take a flyer on others when a promising opportunity presents itself. That's the attitude of rational selfishness, dealing with others objectively and putting in the effort to make the most of one's social opportunities. That's how justice and benevolence work hand in hand to support a happy, flourishing, and successful life. Thank you. I've got time for a question, maybe. Can you scoot over to the microphone that's over there? Lori, run. Sure, Penny.
Thank you, Will. Is it on? It's recording. Oh. I have a question about people who don't understand benevolence, rugged individualists, people who are just, they don't understand compassion, they don't understand sympathy, they don't understand courtesy, but they're full-on egoists, individualists. I have a friend like that, and I could never, I didn't know what the basis for, I couldn't quite convince him that benevolence was in his self-interest. So I didn't know where to start with that argument.
Can you just point him out that he's pissing off a lot of people, and that there are people who aren't listening to him and that aren't dealing with him because it's a pain and he's rude? It makes a huge... Oh, okay. Well, then there you go. QED. I think that's all the time we've got for questions, but I'll be happy to follow up after the session. Thanks. Thank you all.